We know there are challenges for employers in the market. From market trends to interviews with industry leaders, let us be your trusted advisor as we explore the Benefit Summary, presented by Genesis Health, with your host, Matt Monahan.
All right, man. George, thanks for being here. Appreciate you making the trip uptown. Looking forward to talking through today. I guess I'd love to start off, like, maybe if you could just tell us a little about yourself, your background, even any personal history you want to share. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for having me. So background, I grew up in Bermuda, the tiny little island in the Atlantic. Went to university in the UK and worked in the public sector as a health economist for about 10 years before moving to the US. Did an MBA here. Met my wife there. She told me I was moving to New York, so that's how I ended up here. And I did a short stint at McKinsey doing healthcare consulting, and then got involved in the health tech scene in New York. So I was an early employee at Oscar Health, and then Cedar in the patient payment space.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a wife that told me I was going to live in New York too, and like, despite any effort to move out, I can't. It's like we're here.
Yeah, I joke that I came kicking and screaming, but I actually love it here.
Oh, it's the best. I love it here too.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, I'm like, more than 1,000 square feet would be fantastic.
Yeah.
I would love to just jump into on your professional background. You had, with your time at Oscar, you did some really interesting stuff. But even just how did you get into this business? Because even going through your progression, going McKinsey, doing the healthcare consulting, getting into the health tech space, what drew you into this? Because we all kind of fell into it or got into it some way, but it always kind of felt like it was never intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the poster child for that. So I had my undergrad degree paid for partly by the Bermuda government, and I owed them 3 years of civil service afterwards. And so I went back, and I just assumed I was going to work in finance at some point. And so I was looking at jobs they had open in their Ministry of Finance, and they were all really boring jobs. And then I happened to talk with someone in their Ministry of Health that had a really interesting job around kind of health financing reform. And so I just kind of took that job, and it was starting that for a year. And that kind of really drew me into it. And I just found it fascinating because I had more of an economics background, and just how people deal with their healthcare financial situation is really real and interesting.
Yeah.
So then when I moved to the US, that was my first interaction with a system where I couldn't just walk in and get care. And the healthcare financial aspect was really a personal financial management aspect. So I've always been super interested in that. That's what initially drew me to Oscar, because we had this really consumer-centric model, and we're figuring out how people better interact with their healthcare. And same thing with Cedar. But I always felt like we were scratching the surface on how people manage their finances in healthcare on a long-term basis and how they plan.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things that I found really challenging in this, is that people don't really understand this. Yeah. And even as a user, right? Take what we do for a living, going out and being like, oh, what does this mean to my plan? You have to go look at a plan document. You have to think about it. It's not it comes naturally because we do it. But if we have to even process it and give it the amount of thought we give, I can only imagine what somebody's parent is trying to figure out, or someone's child, or just someone who's not in this world. And then it's interesting because from your time at Oxford, you went up against some really, really old players. I mean, between Aetna and Cigna, we had talked about, but they're hundreds of years old. When you trace them back to their beginning, 1853 in the 1700s with Cigna, going all the way back on their lineage, and even UHC's 50 plus years old. So how is it building a brand that's going to go compete against those guys, and then trying to launch in each of the states, and then trying to contract with the same facilities that are, contracted with them on probably more advantaged contracts just based on their size and breadth?
Yeah, it was tough. It was not an easy thing. I mean, the biggest thing is we had one major advantage, which was that we were a mission-driven company that attracted some really phenomenal talent. And when you start with that, then any problem or challenge is surmountable suddenly. So that's the key point and a key takeaway I had from working at that company, that if you can get the right people and they really care about the problem, then you can figure out how to solve it. But the way I think about how we tackled it is, it was just baby steps. So, when I was there, one of the early things I was doing was setting up distribution partnerships and channel partnerships. And I used to go out and I had to have conversations, and these folks would be like, I have no idea who you are. Who is Oscar? Are you Oscar? What is this thing? They didn't know the brand. They didn't trust it. Yeah. So some of that was kind of picking your evangelists early that were willing to take a bet. And then later on, as we started getting a little bit more traction, things started to shift around, and I started having people inbound calling me saying, hey, how can we set up a partnership? I think a lot of that was the same with thinking about networks and setting those up. It was finding kind of early providers and health systems that were really willing to take a bet that we could convince with a very personal pitch. And then over time, as we proved out the model, that was able to scale.
Yeah. I think building on a tech stack too, right? That's not some legacy, layer and layer and layer of old system on top of old system.
That's the other thing. When I think about now, the number of Oscar alum who have gone off and started companies in the healthcare space, it's astounding. And I think a lot of it is that we all got this confidence with Oscar that you can really take this thing and build it from the ground up. Yeah. And if you can build a health insurance company from the ground up, you can build pretty much anything from the ground up.
And it's funny because I think, having worked with a number of those people, I think what's really interesting is everybody attacked a different part of it. So, you have the healthcare build, and, Oscar has now created the scale and can continue to compete and is doing some really innovative stuff. But the people who left have found the different niches that they saw within all the different problem sets that are, make up our healthcare system. So was there any of the headwinds or tailwinds that you saw that led you to then towards Budgie, or was there, what was that made you want to start that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it was that as the insurer, when we started out, we were heavily focused on selling direct to consumer, and we de facto were looking to cut out brokers from the process. And we learned very early on that just doesn't work. And the reason is because we had a really good insurance product, but what we didn't have was a great personal relationship to independently look at a whole bunch of different options and help people navigate that system. So I was always really interested about how that worked. And my big learning from that I've kind of taken to Budgie is, there are things that you can be really good at and you can build and go out and share those with the world and let people understand that expertise. Yeah. But for the things that you don't have as an inherent capability, you've got to listen and learn and work with partners on that. And we learned that as we went along. I hope I've taken that learning and started off with it as a strategy.
Yeah, I think the partnership is interesting because be really good at something and then let somebody else who's really good at something else support you is a really strong message. So as a founder though, and every founder I've met has had some really good stories to what led them to start their company, whether it was experience, a series of experiences. Was there anything in your time at Oscar or otherwise that led you to saying we need this in the marketplace this is why we need Budgie? And then it's probably we should just kind of outline what Budgie is.
Yeah.
That would help too. So everyone's the hell is this?
Yeah. So maybe I'll start by outlining. Yeah. Essentially what we're doing, we're taking really personalized claims level data about individuals and letting them use it to empower them to make the right healthcare decisions, and specifically around open enrollment and choosing the right plans. And what's really different is that we're taking their claims data, not at an aggregate level. We're pulling out insights from it, and we're essentially mock adjudicating it against their different plan benefit options to help them really understand the financial impact of different plans for them. So I think of it less as kind of decision support and more as decision transparency. Yeah. So people aren't looking to be told necessarily you should do this thing or you should do this thing. Most people kind of want to look and see, okay, how have I been using my healthcare, and based on that, what's going to be the impact of me making various different decisions, and then I can make that decision with eyes wide open.
And it's funny because I think now, if you were to look at how many people are doing that, if we enrolled 500 people tomorrow, maybe one has taken in their historical, someone who's got major RX expenses or something. But generally, I don't think anybody's really taking that into consideration. So I would love to understand, and I want to come back to the founder question. Yeah. But one thing I would love to go to is your connectivity that you've created with CMS and some of the access that's the transparency legislation has actually had to benefit you. But really dive in there, because I think that really speaks to what makes you guys different than anything else that's out there.
Absolutely. And so this is a super interesting space for anyone that knows anything about it. But you had the 21st Century Cures Act, and then you had some of these CMS rules that came out of it. There was the transparency rule, and there was also the CMS interoperability rule. And basically within this, what it had was this requirement that carriers now have APIs, and these are application programming interfaces. Essentially, it's a way of sharing data in real time. And they had to create these to share claims history and much more for specific members of theirs for CMS regulated plan types. So Medicare Advantage, Medicaid, CHIP, ACA plans. Now, some carriers also put all of their commercial claims data available through these APIs. So like Anthem did it for all 40 million of their members. Kaiser Permanente's done it. Some of the other Blues have done it. And so that was a moment, and this is kind of connected with my founder story. I had seen this coming down the pipes and thought, wow, this is amazing. We're finally reaching a point where all of that data that 15 years ago was on paper, and then we went through this real hard process of turning it into digital data, and now we're finally getting to a point where we can relatively easily access it in real time. And that's when we can finally build these really great digital experiences that are personalized for someone, so that I'm not just logging on to a portal and getting educated about different types of plans, but I can actually see more of what looks like and feels like a financial dashboard for me.
Yep.
So we've been connecting to this data, and it works by and large. I mean, it's good quality data coming through. And we've had several infrastructure partners in the space that had jumped in. So if you've heard of FlexSpa or OneUp Health, there's some of the ones that are connecting to these. And I think you're going to see a wave of companies like ours that are connecting and using this data in a more real-time manner.
Do you see? I mean, I want to walk through too what that means for the employee, because I think in taking this back to a very simple explanation, this basically means an employee can log into your website.
Yeah.
They can approve that your site can access that data on their behalf.
Yeah.
And then they can have access, your system can, and your algorithms can have access to that data going back, was it 2016?
Yeah.
So that, basically 6 years of claims data that you can leverage. And then that employee goes through the decision process and reviews their plans. Your algorithms will direct them to a benefit that makes the most sense for them, right? Am I looking at that right?
That's spot on.
All right. So I think from an employee standpoint, where this is different than some of the traditional solutions that are out there, is it's basically saying, hey, over the last 6 years, you've averaged X in deductible spend or X in RX. This plan makes the most sense for you. You guys call it a bestimate, right?
Yeah, we call it a bestimate. It's essentially, don't worry about what your copays are on different plans or what your deductibles are. You shouldn't need to worry about that nitty gritty and go pick out old EOBs from your insurance portal and try and figure out what you've been spending and doing. At the end of the day, what you need is someone to give you a number, which is, what's our best guess of what your total healthcare budget is going to be on each of these plans? And that needs to be inclusive of whatever premium is coming out of your paycheck, whatever your likely out-of-pocket expense is going to be based on your historical claims, as well as scenarios that may be happening for you. And you need to be able to factor in any pre-tax contributions to an HSA or an FSA. So there's a lot of education you can be doing around that, but people need to be both educated on how those things work, as well as just have that number to be able to understand, is this going to be $3,000 out of my pocket or $8,000 out of my pocket? Because you ask most people in the street, say, how much was spent on your healthcare in total last year out of your budget, and they're going to have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, your best case is you're going to get an answer on, what they spent out of their paycheck, right?
Exactly.
I mean, my paycheck, I lose, $200 a month in, paycheck contributions, but then I don't think they even equate those premiums to also then, my RX was $5 for these 4 medicines each, and whatever. I don't think they break it down like that, and it's tough.
Yeah.
It's a lot of data to track, and you have to be very detail oriented to keep up with it, because even the EOBs are confusing.
Yeah.
That's not a clear process.
Yeah, and where I see this moving is, you've had over the years companies that have tried to stitch together people's medical and healthcare records, but often, I was one of the first people when Apple started connecting to all the Fire data to go connect all of my health system accounts. And it was great. I open up this app and I'm looking at lab results from 4 years ago, and that was it. Then I never opened it again because there was nothing to do with it. So what's really important is to be able to move on. So I kind of think of it the same way that if you have you probably have a banking app that you use. 10, 15 years ago when these things were first being developed, you used to open it up and it'd be like, here's your balance, and be like, great, I could have checked that at an ATM. That's useful, but I'm not going to use it too much. And then they started progressing. They started pulling in transactions, and then you started getting tips of things that you could do, and you started being able to pay bills through them, and they started to become much, much more useful. And so that's where we're going, which is you start by pulling in someone's data to give them all the context, and then you start building all of these really delightful experiences so that they can actually make decisions that make sense based in this thing.
And you've said, too, from a Buka perspective, half of them are already participating in this actively with the APIs. There are other ones that are willing to provide the data feeds, which, for anyone who's curious what a data feed is, it's like the fax version of, technology integration. It's not great, but it's better. It's good. Yeah. And once you have it in your system, it's there, and you have good data to work with, but it's just a little more clunky. And I think also like the other avenue is going to be TPAs, right? Like
Absolutely.
you're starting at the third-party administrators that have millions of members as well. And as you start collecting that data, I think that becomes intrinsically more valuable for the employee experience, but also just for, like, I think directing employees to the right place is also inherently going to save money for the employers.
Yeah,
There's a downstream impact on this by just saying, like, hey, you're 28 years old, you're healthy, you're not on medicines. Like, you can take the high deductible plan, and there's no risk in that.
Exactly. This is all about cutting waste out of the system. So you're cutting waste for the employee, and this is a win-win scenario typically for an employer, because if that employee isn't wastefully using healthcare and is making the right decisions financially, that typically means that there's going to be less waste that's passed through in premium cost to the employer.
Yeah.
So it's both a cost savings opportunity and a benefit for your employees.
Yeah, I love the where you can go with this, because gathering millions of people's data, right, gives you the opportunity to like really turn the corner on what you do next. So are you looking at like bill pay next, or is there other places you think this can go? Because I think it's limitless, and I think one of the challenges on solutions has been there's all these different point solutions, and it feels like each one of them takes a knee like right before like you could see like the use case really transcending. Yeah. And so I would love to see where you're going with that and kind of understand what you're thinking.
Yeah. So as a team, we often have this conversation about, what does this look like in 5 years' time? Who are we actually building this for? How do we get there? And so one of the big decisions we had to make early on, which I think differentiates that's in a lot of way beyond the pure data, is that everything we are building is focused around the employee as an individual. And what that liberates us to do is say, look, we want to provide value for employers as well, and it's great that there's this win-win scenario, and it's a perfect distribution partnership to get to that employee as an individual. But in the long run, benefits, it's a long-term game for the individual, how they navigate it throughout their life. So where I see this going is this needs to be something that's portable between employers as people are switching jobs regularly. They're going from the W-2 workforce to the 1099 workforce. They then age into Medicare Advantage. And they don't want to be interacting with a whole bunch of different systems every step along the way to understand their benefits. So where we need to get to is this point where we can connect with that consumer. We're connecting all of their data. We're helping them manage these decisions. And we're an easy plug-in along the way.
Yeah. That's really an interesting thought. And like even in my mind, I'm now trying to think like, what does that look like? How do you work that?
Yeah.
Does it move into like an individual membership model versus like a corporate model, or is it some version of both? Right.
Yeah.
But I think like the employees being able to take that. And I also think there comes with the amount of data you're getting, there's an analytics component that brings some value when you look at what's valuable for the employer is to understand how their employees are using the data. And we use data warehouses in our own business. We currently partner with Deerwalk and are moving potentially to another one. But like you're also collecting the same data. So there is like this other whole claim data subset that you'll have that is an interesting avenue, I think, too.
Yeah, so we're getting claims data at scale, but beyond that, I mean, we're also getting engagement data, so we're getting responses to how people plan to and are using their healthcare and what matters to them. So we build that all into our engine. But the other thing is behind all this is a powerful engine that we're re-adjudicating essentially these claims in real time. And so when you think about planning for an employer, it's very easy to look at aggregate level claims and get a sense of things that you can do that are going to impact your rates. But if you really want to drill down to the individual level impact, that's where we can be helping. And so that's the conversation that we've had where we've launched with employers, where we then go back to the broker and we say, look, you've been having a conversation with this group about what you can be doing around your benefits. And we can take that, we can look at different design permutations, contribution strategies, and then we can give you a readout of, in practice, how is this going to impact the employees at that group? Yeah,
which is interesting because when we do that now, in like today's environment, that's an actuarial output that we're putting together. And you're just doing it based on, if we move, the cost of this care by $75 a month, who migrates where, or if we change the deductible by this. And it's an educated guess based on historical claims. But you're saying we could do that actually using like, here's the data coming out of the system based on employee purchasing patterns, right? And this is how it would look.
Exactly. And where I think this gets really interesting is when you think about that conversation with the head of benefits, you may have a real cost savings opportunity by introducing a narrow network option. And you might come to them and say, well, there's going to be about a 90% or 92% match from a disruption basis here. And they're going like, okay, well, what are the 8% of visits my employees are going to have where they're not going to be in network with a doctor? And being able to get down to that level to be able to say, look, they're going to be these folks that they're going to get pushed to a plan that is right for them that has out-of-network coverage. There are these ones that it just makes sense for them to be on this, and we may suggest that they switch doctor to an in-network one, but the savings is so worth it. So being able to get essentially that last mile of engagement and conversation with the employees, I think can really help with your planning.
Yeah, and I think that the narrow network, the tiered network, the direct contracting, and I've talked on this podcast a couple times about that, but I think that's where a lot of this goes. Not everyone. And when we got together a couple weeks ago, one of the things we talked about is like living in Manhattan. I don't want to walk across Mount Sinai's campus to go to my narrow network at NYU because I lose so much inconvenience and time.
Yeah, but I also don't care if a hospital on East Long Island is in network for me.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. So I think there's a lot of this, which is there's an educational component that like the traditional enrollment meeting couldn't cover. Like you just couldn't. I mean, that is like the worst medium of communication. Go in, sit in a room, nobody wants to be there. They have a benefit summary in their hand and you go through it. And it's just not that interesting. It's really challenging. And it's not getting articulated. And what gets lost in that sauce is that the employee doesn't really understand what you're saying to begin with, and they don't know the benefit of this. Whereas like if you could show them this through the technology, through an app, where it's showing like if you take this tiered network, you can go here, it's going to, most out-of-pocket expenses are going to be free. Or if you go into this facility, it's going to be covered at 100%. Through the narrow network, or you use this center of excellence. That's the layer that I think this brings. And I think being able to do that with the visual of dollars versus an avatar is a major change in what's been happening, at least going back to 2010.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff out there like the Microsoft paperclip, which, we all used to just click, thank you, go away. Where this really absolutely matters.
I haven't thought about that in a long time.
Because it probably popped up once and you're like, oh, let me try this. Oh, it's useless. Thank you, Microsoft. I wonder if it's still around anywhere.
It's probably on my mom's computer.
Exactly. But people don't want to spend 3 days learning about how the healthcare system works every time they need to make a decision. And that's essentially what you're asking in these meetings, which is like you've got to understand how this product works, how the network works, how it relates back to your care. And you're not going to have confidence making decisions in that scenario. So you need to have it at that really personal level where you can say, look, we can provide education all day long, but what matters to you is to know these are your risks if you're taking this plan or taking this benefit. This is how much you could potentially save by being on this one, and it's based on your data, not just like people like you.
Yeah, well, we give people 2% of a year to make a decision on a financial component that is one of their top 5 expenses.
Yeah,
and we say here's your window. We are going to give you 2 weeks to talk it through with your significant other or to think about it. And then you have to do it, and this is your deadline. And maybe we'll have some open enrollment meetings, or we'll have some communications. And there's a lot of consultants like us that I believe do a really good job at that. But it's still, I think, from an experience standpoint, it's a big ask for someone to be master this, understand it, and know that this could cost you anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000 a year.
Yeah. And
out-of-pocket expenses. It's a big ask, and most people just don't have the bandwidth to understand it. They just look at it I'll just sign up. I have healthcare, check. And that's the wrong box to check. It really needs to be I have the plan that's going to protect me best from this list of things that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And throw in there that, we're people that are really educated in this space that are probably earning above the median salary in the U.S. Healthcare is a highly, highly regressive tax, meaning that the less you earn, the more that is as a proportion of your total pay. So when you think about someone that may be making $25,000 a year, that is really, really meaningful if you can be saving them $2,000, $3,000 a year. So sometimes I'll have a conversation with someone that earns $200,000, $300,000 a year, and they're like, "Well, is this an important enough decision?" I'm like, "Maybe not for you, bud, because healthcare doesn't really matter to you from an expense perspective as much.
Yeah.
But for 92% of the population in the U.S., this is a real, real financial burden. It's the leading cause of bankruptcy." And that's only going to get worse as healthcare prices increase and employers are stuck in this, between a rock and a hard place where they're getting these increases and they have to pass them down to their employees.
Well, costs have increased, 50% since, going back to 2001, just based on, a Kaiser study, right? Just compounded trend, going all the way through. And so it's it's not sustainable. And I agree with you. I feel for those people that we're just saying like, all right, come off whatever you're doing, learn this, and then make that decision. So supporting them is inherently important. And I do believe, though, that this isn't like an investment that the employer is making in just, we're going to do this because it's just the right thing for the employee. Like there is a benefit financially for them.
Yep.
But it's also like, we talk about there's all those other things that, presenteeism, absenteeism that are led through like different stresses and stressors in life. And the financial component of that across the United States is one of the major ones. So there's a mental health and overall just employee wellness and health that I think this brings on the front end. And, this is a tool too that you can also, this isn't just like open enrollment. This is also, something you would use, for onboarding new hires as well, right? Like we talked about a use case of using that for, sending someone the opportunity to review the benefits before they even come over.
Yeah.
Right? Using this as that tool.
Yeah, this has been a really interesting conversation. We had our first employer launch this recently, and it's a real pain point for recruiters because they're stuck in this spot where they need to talk about the benefits of their company. And they're like, I don't know, I can send you these SBCs, and then this person may be looking at multiple different offers, and they need to figure out what this benefit means for them. So we've created this in a way where in that email, a recruiter can just send a link with the plans loaded, and then that prospect or candidate can look at it and understand what the financial implication is going to be for them, which I think is really powerful, particularly if you're an employer that's offering good benefits. You often don't get credit for the value of those benefits. I've had this conversation all the time as well with heads of benefits where they'll say, look, we have really, really valuable benefits. We've made some changes this year, and our costs have gone way up because of the value we're providing to our employees, and they just don't understand it. They don't see it. And so being able to get that message across in a dollars and cents way, I think is really valuable.
We've had a couple clients too, and I think of this also from a retention perspective, like an employee retention perspective.
Yeah.
Because we've had a bunch of clients who've said like, there's a couple different facilities down the road or a couple different companies down the road that are offering better benefits than we are, or in a lot of those scenarios, I think it's the perception of better benefits than it is. But there is something that's lower, whether it's a lower deductible, but they might have had a higher out of pockets. There's a whole bunch of things, but like in totality, when you could say, well, look at the review, here are the three options we have. You can model this out and decide like, what makes more sense for you in a competitive environment. I think that type of transparency, when the other company is just sending, the SBC and you're just getting that cert or whatever, and you're doing your math, I think allows for some simplicity in the review. And so it's funny because I never thought of that use case when you told me about that. It was not something that was on my radar at that point. But I find it doesn't surprise me that there is an opportunity there.
Yeah. I mean, it's one that I hadn't thought of at all when starting the company. And that's, I think of it as my listening tour, which is just every time I can talk to anybody at an employer anywhere, I'll just talk about what we're doing, the technology behind it, and figure out if there's a pain point that resonates for them. And that's one I heard a few times.
And now, is there, like for you, have you found, is there like a best time to roll this out to an employee population? Is it around open enrollment? Is it before open enrollment? Is it 6 months out? What do you see is like the way to do this, like from a best practice standpoint so far?
Yeah, from a best practice, I think there's a lot of value in rolling out several months in advance, because then we can do all of the placement in your employee handbook and materials and get that out of the way when you're not right in the midst of open enrollment. So I think there's some value there, and it just means we've got it all set up. And then when you get to open enrollment, we've already got the claims feeds and everything set up. So of course, these types of things tend to be more top of mind when many employers are just in their couple months leading up to open enrollment. So we turn around fast, and depending on the carrier, we can have this thing set up in a couple of days because of the way we're connecting to the data. But I always have this conversation with employers where I say, look, let's start off as right now. You don't need to wait for open enrollment. Let's get everything set up and in place so that this isn't another thing you need to worry about implementing, in those final few weeks.
Yeah, in the dumpster fire. That
exactly.
Is like the couple weeks leading up to open enrollment. And is there, for you guys, like, do you look at, is there a target market for you in this, or is it, whether fully insured, self-funded, does it matter in your mind?
It doesn't matter if they're fully insured or self-funded. And the way I think about this is that our target is primarily, how does the employee interact with their benefits? And when you think about the typical employee, do they have any idea whether their employer is self-funded or not?
Care.
They have no idea. They don't care. So where it does tend to resonate, I'd say a little more around mid-market, Just in terms of size, that's when you're starting to get a little bit more complexity in your benefits, and you really want tools that are kind of easy to implement and quickly pass on to your employees. So we definitely have a good space there, but we can certainly work up and down from there.
Yeah, I would say, middle market is probably it's also where you have an HR team that has the least amount of staff, the least amount of support, normally. And so to me, that's a logical space. But from a use case standpoint, what I always say is just because you fall in a certain segment as an employer, or really as an employee, your employees are the same people.
Exactly.
We all worked at big company. You were at McKinsey. Yeah. I spent time at Aetna. I think the same when I was at Aetna that I do now when I'm at Genesis. It's just, the size of the company you're at is different. So people still need the support.
Yeah.
So it's
absolutely.
That's where it's kind of funny, but I agree. To me, from a product standpoint, this can be done on a phone, right? So everything can be done via the phone, because that was one of the things we've run into with certain tech solutions where it either has to be online or it's an app. But everybody now, whether they don't have a computer, they definitely have a computer in their pocket.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. You've got all these things, and we went through this craze where everyone wanted to create an app that you download on your phone, which you shouldn't need to do that. So ours, it's not an app that you need to download from anywhere. It's you click a link, and it gives you a really great experience, whether it's on your phone or on a laptop or computer.
Yeah.
And it's amazing seeing different employers where, we've worked with some large tech companies where, we'll see 97% of the employees that use it are going through on a computer. And then you'll see in other settings where it's 75% are using their phone to do it when you're looking at retail. So we have these huge swings, and the experience is about the same. So we've built this thing, very much with that in mind, that we don't, we want people to be able to click the link, get through the flow within a couple of minutes, and not have to download anything or set up usernames and passwords. No one wants to do that.
Yeah, and then the future is feeding that information into a Ben admin system, right? Direct connectivity there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that would be ideally through an API, I would think, right? So it's feeding directly into the experience, and then it goes from there.
Yeah, and some admins or Ben admins are catching up in this space, so they're starting to create more robust API strategies. So those are the ones that are great to work with. At the moment, for ones that don't, we just sit as a link that you can paste within their enrollment module. So it's still very easy. That there's no kind of tech integration that we need to do.
Yeah.
But certainly for ones that are more open to it and a little bit further along in their own tech strategy, then we're definitely integrating further.
Well, we're at a place in our business now, I think in healthcare in general, that half the industry could spell API now.
Yeah.
3 years ago, I don't know if they could have, or 5 years ago maybe. But that's changed significantly.
Yeah, but that's also why I made a point of saying what it is. Again, it's application programming interface, and it's essentially a way of sharing data in real time quite flexibly versus what the entire industry has been built on, where we send imagine the equivalent of sending someone an Excel spreadsheet by email once a day, but just through a more automated system.
Yeah, that gets us out of the SFTP world.
Exactly.
Which I will not miss.
Yeah.
After learning what it was and then having to live in it. So
it certainly has its uses, but at an individual level, when you're trying to create a really great consumer experience with real-time data, that's not where we want to be.
No, and I won't miss those days.
Yeah.
So, George, I would love, as we wrap this up, is there anything you'd like to leave us with, just on thoughts on Budgie or whatever? I really appreciate you coming up. This was awesome. So
I really enjoyed this, and I've enjoyed our conversations in general. I did maybe harping back for a moment when I said one of the learnings I had from Oscar was figuring out what your real strengths are, and then figuring out where to partner and where to listen. And if there's one thing that I've really learned over this experience, there's a lot of listening that has been helpful for me in terms of understanding about how people think about and engage with their benefits. One area where I'm becoming much more vocal and pushing back is there is this, I've heard over and over again, this pushback that, you're never going to get the claims data. Carriers aren't going to share it. Employers aren't going to be able to get it. And that was true a few years ago. That was absolutely true, and I understand where that sentiment comes from. But it is also the biggest thing that I push back on now, where employers are getting smarter about pushing back through ERISA to get access to their claims data. We've had the Medicare Blue Button and access to Medicare claims data. We've had this new regulatory push and these APIs that are coming out. It is a pretty small sliver left of smaller employer groups that can't get access to their claims data, and that is going away because it's just not going to be sustainable. There are companies like mine and others that are connecting to this and using this, and you just imagine if you're an Aetna sales rep trying to get an account, and you go to them and you say, but these 4 solutions that you're using, you're not going to be able to use them anymore if you switch over to us. You're just going to lose in that, like left, right, and center. So the days are numbered where this data sharing isn't going to be, just a de facto assumption.
Yeah, but I love that you closed with a nice jab at Aetna there, where the data can be challenging to get. But I agree. And I think in this fiduciary responsibility now that employers are taking on, where they can be held liable, this is a way of providing transparency to the employees so that, that feeling or that potential litigation of fiduciary responsibility or not doing your fiduciary responsibility through the analysis and all that stuff, this is a way of proving that you did.
Yeah. And
it's a way of empowering employees to have a tool to support them to believe that you did. And so I think I know that there's a home for this going forward, and I think it only expands. And like the data get, from any of the carriers is going to improve. And it's improved. 5 years ago, if you told me you were pulling this data in an API environment, I would have told you you're nuts.
Yeah.
And I probably would have told you that 2 years ago. But now that you're getting it, it's just a matter of time.
The world is changing. And if you're starting a company, why build for the now when you can build for the future?
Yeah.
And that future is pretty clear in this space around data accessibility. So that's my view. I want to be building for where we're going to be in a few years' time. And we can support the present world for a limited time. But everything we're building is focused around where is this going to be in 3 years? How do we build against that? And be ready to support the legacy stuff in the meantime.
Yeah, I agree. Well, listen, I appreciate making the time to do this and making it uptown. You heading back to Brooklyn or Soho?
Heading back to Soho.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. This was fantastic. It was good to see you again, too.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks,
good
George.
to see you, too.
Get more out of your benefits when you connect with Genesis Health on LinkedIn or through our website, www.genesis.health. And be sure to subscribe to the Benefit Summary wherever you get your podcasts. That way you don't miss the benefit of future episodes. This has been the Benefit Summary, presented by your friends at Genesis Health.